Hi, I'm Vanshay.
I'm Daniel.
And I'm Siobhan.
And we're the Fantastic Four. Minus one. What? Okay, let's go.
So, today's discussion is supposed to be about inequality and whether we think it's inevitable, which means unavoidable in a sense. So what do we think?
Generally speaking, I would say inequality to some degree is inevitable due to the simple fact that we live in a capitalist society. We can all acknowledge that as a fact. And for someone to make money, someone's going to make money, someone's going to make less money. There has to be a boss and a worker. America tends to have this really rigid structure for how things are built. It's almost a caste system, but they don't want to say caste system because it seems too archaic or unpatriotic. But I feel like it would always, like in a capitalist society, there's always going to be like someone on top, and there's always going to be underlings and everyone else that falls in between. So I feel like it's inevitable in a sense.
Well,
I'm not admit that.
Piggybacking off of that, yeah, that kind of makes sense because at first I was about to be like, I don't know, but when I think about it, like when you think about companies where like you have the white man on top, that's normal, that's tradition, whatever. But then when you think about companies that a black man that started or a black woman, everybody's like, oh my God, what? Is it gonna last? Da 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 da. So it's like, okay.
And also, like, stereotypes and prejudice have been, they're tightly woven in American history. People like to pretend that racism and slavery was so long ago when America is like a baby nation, and considering they spent about 200 years enslaving people, that's a big part of history. And then on top of the whole civil rights movement, that was like 40, 50 years ago. Like our grandparents were probably children, or give or take, I don't know how old they be, during the civil rights movement, and that was just kind of a throwing the fact that inequality was ever present in your face. Even today, when you look at all the stories that get released to the media, where people of color are like oppressed, they're victimized, put down in a sense, or they're just viewed as lesser. Like inequality has just become such a common thing in America
that it's almost like impossible to go back. I feel like it just started with like slaves, and ever since then it's always been this like system of inequality that's always been present, because it's present socially, just between like relationships between different racial groups. It's present like economically when you're talking about getting a job versus like, you know, how much a black woman or a black man makes to the dollar versus a white woman or a white man, or even like affirmative action, like somebody might get the job over you just because of, you know, your skin color and things like that. So is it inevitable to some extent? I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes, that it's inevitable.
Actually, I'm gonna go back and recant my statement where I say in some way, I guess it's inevitable. I would say yes, like for certain it's inevitable. Because just thinking about like the colonization of America, that was a pretty prime example of like, I feel like that was just like the trial run of how everything else was going to play out. Because it came over, so the Native Americans were like, well, we need land, so you gotta go. But and from then on, it's mostly for people of color and other minority groups who are below. But of course, considering intersectionality, there are other people that are gonna face different struggles with different inequalities and different prejudices, and there's like going to be a mix with certain groups. Like there's like the glass ceiling effect is just a thing for all women, where women, if women are like in a corporate chain, like in a company, they can only get so high because of the glass ceiling. Like they can't be like, they can work their way up, but they're not going to be like the CEO or the CFO. They're going to like work their way up to like the CEO's assistant or something, or like the receptionist. And on top of that, then there's like black women where the glass ceiling effect is there, but then of course there's the misogyny and there's the racism. They mix this thing called misogynoir, that pretty much dictates that black women can't experience misogyny and racism like individually. It's all wrapped up into like one mess of prejudice. So I feel like with all of these prejudices and everything, equality is inevitable. But I feel like acknowledging that there, like, if we all, if America just kind of as a whole just kind of acknowledged it rather than trying to rewrite it or just ignore it, then those would be like the baby steps to making things better.
Yeah, I agree with that because I think inequality is one of those issues that you know it exists, but nobody wants to talk about it, so it continues to exist, and then that's when I feel like the situation gets worse. Like when it's brought to light, there's more efforts going to try to suppress the people that are trying to bring it to light than trying to actually do something about it. So then that just raises the level of inequalities even more.
I don't know how people think, because like I said in class, people have this idea where they really want to be comfortable, and they're like, well, if we ignore it, it'll go away. But like, if you want to put it in simpler terms, like if there's something wrong with your body, I mean, yeah, sometimes you ignore it, it goes away because you can't afford health care. That's a whole other problem. But like, if I break my arm, I'm not just gonna be like, well, it'll fix itself eventually.
Right.
Like, you have to acknowledge that there's a problem and then take the steps to fixing it. Like if you're sick, you're like, well, I'm sick. Maybe I should get medicine. Or you figure out what's wrong with you and then you treat it accordingly. That's It's simple as that. But of course, because of inequality, it's not going to be so cut clean. Like acknowledging it's the first step, and then rather than actually being able to take steps to fix it, you have to like discuss ways on how to fix it, where everybody's included. Because even in like the feminist movement, there's equality, because some feminists are like, oh yeah, pro women, but some of them are like want certain women to like drop parts of their identity to join the movement. Like they're like, oh, you're a feminist, you're a woman first, but if it's a black woman, it's like, well, I can't pick and choose, well, I'm a woman or I'm black first. You're a black woman. They both hold the same weight. They're both equal parts of your identifier. And then of course and then there's like some feminists that don't recognize trans women as women. So they're like, no, we're not gonna really fight for their rights, even though, I don't know, even with like social movements, it still breeds inequality because there are prejudices that are just ingrained inside of everyone. I feel to a certain extent. I agree with that.
Go. Okay. That kind of goes back, like, because I'm a social major and everything, I had to take a social inequalities class. And in there, we talked about, like, this, it's a wheel of diversity, and it's got, like, factors you can't change about yourself on the outside, and then factors you can change on the inside. So, of course, factors on the outside would be like, well, I mean, technically you can change your gender, but, like, you know, your biological sex is on here. And then your race and things like that. And then in the inside, it's like, you know, like economic stuff, education, and things like that. And it's like based on different way where you place yourself in different facets of the wheel. We kind of talked about inequalities in that sense. So if I was, okay, well, I'm black, female, middle class, like how is my life different from someone who's okay, maybe black male and lower class, or white male and higher class, things like that. We kind of explored the differences among there. So I think that's kind of where like this conversation collide, because we've got the people who we're supposed to be talking about. Okay, Marx, okay, he was white. Du Bois, right? Okay, because I almost said it wrong. Du Bois, he's black. So it's kind of like you can kind of maybe see like both spectrums based on their perspective and how it kind of like relates to us.
No, wait, by you bringing them up, like, what I observed in class, like, everyone heard about Marx and Weber. They're both white. And, like, then when we talked about Du Bois, she was like in class, she was like, anybody heard of them? And it was like one person raised their hand. So I'm like, okay, why didn't they hear about him? And he basically had the same views as them. He just went at it like in a different way. So why are they not talking about it like in like outside of college? Like, cause I do remember talking about him, but it was like really brief. So I didn't remember like anything about him like in high school or when like I was in class or whatever. So all of that was like a refresher.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was like, okay, so are we only learning about him because we're in college? Like, or do they feel like they have to talk about him? Like, I don't know. I just started thinking about that.
And I mean, I feel like his studies would be like significant in sociology, considering he was the first black sociologist. What was he? Not the first black sociologist. Was he the first black sociologist? Or was he the first? Or was he the first one to graduate from like a I forgot, but I feel like his views would be. I feel like his views would be really. You're right. I feel like his views would be really important because everyone who examines sociology and whenever they start talking about things like race, if they're like whatever race they talk about, they can only experience it from like an outside perspective if they're not a part of that race. While Du Bois could talk about, he could talk about the white sociologists because they're everywhere. But as far as like giving his view of things, like that's a whole like the black community in sociology. I feel like back then it would be like a whole untapped community. So he really offered some really profound insight that a lot of people are like missing out on.
Yeah.
I feel. But like I said, we live in a capitalist society, and I feel like I can relate that to Weber, because Weber was talking about class, status, and all that, and all of those do play a really heavy role in inequality. And then there are other things that come in, like you said, like race and sex, gender, sexual orientation, so forth, so on. But like things like class, your class and status you're born into. And I mean, you can work, you could go, if you're going down in the class, that's really easy. But working your way out of the class you're born into is harder to do because there are so many things that come together that might kind of keep you stuck in one spot, or like you can exist and you can thrive, but I feel like there's always a limit to it in some sense. And I mean, of course, that I'm not going to just generalize that and say that's for everybody, because there are plenty of stories, like rags to riches stories, where people were born from nothing and grew and did something. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that everybody in the town, like there's always a rags to riches story, and I feel like something that's really important that might be getting left out of that story is like the rest of the town, because they'll talk about how that person visits the town and donates money and everything, but at the same time, everyone else is still there. So, and like everyone else, they could be working hard or twice as hard as that person, but life tends to be, it's a gamble, kind of. Like sometimes it's the right place, right time, and then you happen to strike gold. And some people have to dig deeper to find it, and they might not find as much. Like, so I feel like, um, as far as, I feel like as long as we're operating off of this system where it's like lower, middle, and upper class, then equality would be inevitable due to the fact that, like, if you're making such clear cut sections and like just kind of putting people into them, then like of course they're gonna, like, then that like lets people know who are higher, that they're higher than somebody, they're lower than somebody, and then they get stuck in that. Because like if I was born into money, if I was like in high class society, I wouldn't take time out of my day to look back and think, well, I probably would if I major in sociology, but I wouldn't have to take time out of my day to look back and see that people who don't have as much as me are suffering, because I don't have to pay attention to their suffering. I don't have to empathize with their suffering because it's not mine. Like I can focus on myself and still live my life just fine and be unaffected by the struggle. But on the other hand, if I was born into a position of power, I wouldn't have to focus on their suffering, but I could have a dramatic impact on their suffering if I didn't think about them.
I think that's kind of one of the points like Dubois was making in his thing, because that is, I did notice that like when she asked who heard of him, of course like I heard of him because I've heard about the ongoing them to him and Booker T. Washington for the longest, but not everybody heard about him. So that just kind of goes to show like the inequality with that even though he had the same, just about some of the same views, same premises as the others, he had to probably work 10 times harder
to get his point across.
To get his point across, or to get recognized for it. And I think it's like, I think that's why he's pushing so hard for like us getting economically like equal first before we try to do the social, because I really feel like economic and social status, class, whatever you want to call it, are kind of like directly linked together. Because, first of all, people with money, that automatically equals power. So you're gonna know some prestigious people, and that's already social, because like, okay, well, you high class, you know this person and that person, and then same goes for like lower class. You will not necessarily have all the connections you need, and that's one thing they don't want to see. They don't want to see a black person with power. Hence, why do you think people were so eager for Obama to get out of office and drag him and everything else? Because he had that power at his hands, and then people are looking like, well, whoa, he's actually kind of getting up here, like sitting at the table with all the big dogs, and like we don't like it. And so that's why I think that I was pushing so hard for that economic equality. And I kind of didn't really see it till now, because it's kind of like the social will come with it, of course, once you get there. Because I mean, with jobs, like it's already hard for us to get jobs that it is. Also, like with education, okay, that lies within education too. Because if, they say like Caucasian students are more likely to score higher on SAT, ACT, like standardized tests, than African American students are. And then you already got African American students who are already kind of at a disadvantage due to economic class. So they might not be able to afford to go to college as is. Whereas a Caucasian student who comes from like middle to high class family probably has the means to do so. So it's like we're constantly on this cycle of having to push ourselves and having to work harder just to kind of get where we need to get. And I feel like that's why, because think about it, why do like African American males always say they want to play, like they want to go professional sport, they want to be a professional athlete, they want to rap, things like that, things that'll get you money fast and get you power fast so you can get up in that hierarchy of like of economic stability and things like that. So
I want to touch on what you said, because that statistic, the one where they say white students tend to score higher than SAT. I hate when they just kind of boil everything down in statistics and numbers, rather than like an actual study because they don't catch the nuances of things. Like, because there are studies that say, what was it? It was like lower income black schools are like, it's like, what was it? I think it was math. It's more, it's like 2 times as likely for a math teacher to teach math, but math is not like their area of study. And it's like 3 times as likely to get like for a science teacher to teach science, even though that's not their field of study. And on top of that, there are like used textbooks or old textbooks or no textbooks. And then like they don't have access to like lab equipment and all these things. And they also don't have as much like SAT and college preparatory courses that people can take. And even if they are available, kind of expensive. So even if you wanted to do it, it's not like you had the money to do it. So yeah, I feel like class status and all the other things that go along with intersectionality play a heavy role in that. I feel like that's a part. That's where I really agree on Weber. Where as long as we exist in a society and a system that just kind of stacks people and kind of categorizes them, then of course there's going to be inequality because people tend to not like difference, or if they see like an outsider or the other kind of making their way downtown, they're like they're like, whoa, how did he get here? And there's so many questions that people ask, like if like you said, if there's a white CEO, it's just like, oh well, I guess he worked for it. But if it's like a black CEO, it's like, oh, affirmative action, or he knew somebody, or well, there's like a slew of excuses to why he would be in that position.
Not that he earned it or something like that.
It's like, oh, he didn't work for it. It's like, oh, he just got it because he got it. You know, affirmative action. He took a job, or whatever the excuse may be.
Well, I know going back to like when y'all were talking about how white students score higher. I know. Well, I'm more like about to give an example, sort of, kind of. But I know, say I was a black male and I was still in the situation I am right now, and then they have me part of this statistic, but they're not looking at the factors that, like, why is it like this? You know? So it's like, okay, I'm being compared to a white male. He got like a 4.0, but he is like high at like, what is it? He's in a high economic status or whatever. His parents make money or whatever. But in my case, my mom's a hairdresser and my dad is a mechanic. They don't make that much money. Well, not really a mechanic, but he's a detailer or whatever. They don't make that much money. So in my mind, I got to get it together because I know my parents can't do it for me, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, right now I have a job and I'm in school and I'm still trying to do extracurricular stuff. But now I have to drop my extracurricular stuff because I have to get a second job. So it's like, okay, I'm working more than I'm doing my schoolwork. So it's like, okay, my grades aren't bad, but they're not where they should be or they could be. So it's like...
And then that kind of puts you into that statistic without necessarily knowing the circumstances.
Exactly.
Of what's going on for every individual student. That's why I really don't... I don't want to say I don't like standardized testing, but I think because of standardized testing, we get all these preconceived notions about different students and we like the different types of students when it comes to like racial demographics and stuff like that. And then we're stuck in that. Like, that's why typically, like with African American students, we like when we have like black professors and things like that, because it's like, okay, finally someone I can relate to, someone who will understand, because I had a teacher in high school. She was my debate teacher, and she always told us that she would push her African American students harder than her Caucasian students because she recognized like the inequalities and things like that. Like, it wasn't, she made it very clear, like, it wasn't necessarily pushing because like, oh, you know, well, you know how it is type. She was really doing it to be like, I want you guys just to be great as everyone else, if not better. Like, you all deserve the same chance. But with all that stuff going on, like all these inequalities, like, they say, oh yeah, like black woman will never make this much money, black man will never make this much money. You automatically start taking that in. You get discouraged yourself, so you're like, okay, well then what's the point of me even doing anything? And that's why my teacher pushed so hard, because it's like, you don't want to get into that mindset where you allow yourself to suffer through the inequality. Like, I think us as the people, like, we should like defy the inequalities, or take a stand against it, or do everything to prove. Because me hearing all the inequalities makes me want to go even harder. Like, in high school, I was in the top 4% of my class, and they weren't expecting a black student to do that, but I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I do the same thing here.
That's why I really stand with what Du Bois said, where when Booker T was like, well, we're just gonna take this handful of scraps they give us, and we're gonna work with it. We're not gonna ask for more, and we can do it. But that's why I like when Du Bois was just kind of like, no. He was like, I feel like Du Bois really acknowledged the fact that he was born into a system that put him on the lower end of things. But then he graduated from like a really prestigious school, and then he wanted to do something that no one had done before him. So I like the fact that Du Bois, I feel like just even his story is kind of inspiring, because of course, even back then, people were more vocal with their hate and prejudices. So you probably heard "you can't do it" or "no" more times than someone can count.
Right.
But the fact that I feel like, in a way, inequality is kind of like, I feel like it depends on the person, like the setting, your environment. But like, there are some people where they succumb to the inequalities, which I feel like take more of a Booker T stance. They succumb to it, they take what they can get, and they just run with it and try to make a living. But I feel like there are some people like Du Bois, who was like, no, I'm gonna take what you give me, and then I'm gonna take what I deserve, because I feel like he knew his worth as a person. I feel that's really important. So I feel like that's what inequality and just the existence of all these castes and classes do. Like, your judgment of yourself gets clouded the most, and then you start like not knowing like what you're actually worth, or you just start listening to people tell you your worth. Now, see, I went through the same thing, like, all through kind of life, low key. Like, my mother was always like, Daniel, like, she told me, she was like, Daniel, you can do what you set your mind to. But she was also like, but you also have to recognize that even if you try your hardest, you're probably going to fail plenty of times, because there are people in the world that are not going to like you because of this, that, and the third, and so forth, and so on. And I'm like, okay. And look at me now. And I feel like the inequalities, that kind of work to get you down. But I feel like hearing from my mother the most, and like other people around my hometown, like they made these inequalities, these prejudices, these preconceived notions painfully clear to me. And I feel like I wanted to do my hardest to set myself as far apart as I could from just another stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
So other kids were doing some stuff, I was reading. Kids were doing this, I was doing homework, kind of. But let's be honest. But I feel like that's really Du Bois' stance, and I really firmly stand with him, because I came to college, and then when I came to college, that's when I really realized how far I could go if I applied myself to the fullest. I realized my potential, I realized my worth plus tax, and it's much more than what people ever wrote out to be. People wrote the check, but I added some zeros. And I feel like Marx I feel like he's kind of similar to what Weber said, but he focuses more on like the class alone because Marx was really with the working class, and he did that whole study. And I feel like Marx kind of took kind of a Booker T. Washington ish kind of stance because he was like, oh, well, these people are just they're just victims of their environment, and then this happens, and that happens, and they end up just kind of where they are.
Any more comments?
Questions?
I was gonna say something. I apologize because I was sort of recording the message, but I agree with what you're saying. So I guess it's kind of inevitable because it's not like from birth you could pick or choose what you want to go into. If that was the case, everybody would have money, everybody would have prestige, everybody would have power and all that because, of course, nobody wants to be at a disadvantage. Right. But unfortunately, that's just the way it is. That's why I think it's inevitable because you can't necessarily choose. Of course, when you see your situation, you're like, okay, I want my situation to be different. You would change certain aspects in order to get where you can get. I'm talking like in terms of what you come into, like what you're born into. Like me, like I was born into a middle class family. Like my mom's a speech therapist and works in the school systems, and my dad is manager over a solid waste division for like a company that he works for. So it's like, okay, that's okay, that's middle class, okay. But then that's like, just because you might be a little bit more elevated in one doesn't necessarily mean you're elevated all the way across the board. Like, okay, I got certain economic advantages because I'm in a middle class family, but I have certain racial disadvantages because I'm black and things like that. So that's why I say, like, I think inequality is inevitable because, like, it's like no matter what, someone's going to be at more of an advantage than you, and then someone's going to be at a disadvantage, like behind you, and you could like be on either part of the spectrum. So those were my final comments.
And I mean, I agree with what you said because I feel like I feel like I know for certain that people are born different. There's that whole we're all one race, the human race. There's that argument, and I don't even listen to that anymore because I'm not gonna spend my time trying to be blind to things that I know I'm gonna go through, that I know other people are gonna go through. I know I don't have it as hard as like a lot of people. I know I don't have it as hard as some people back home. I don't have it hard. And some people back home. And I know that inequality is spread disproportionately across the board, depending on like the race, class, gender, party, everything else. So I feel like even if you're born like more privileged than one, there's always going to be something that's going to identify you as the other. And as long as you're the other, your people are going to treat you differently. You're going to get the poor hand in life. I wouldn't say a poor hand. You're not going to get the most desirable hand in life. That's it.
Discussion. Cool. Bye.